All right. We are going to pick up where we left off last week. I do not think I will be releasing a midweek lesson this week because I think I'll be able to keep up where I'm going and I'll add midweek lessons. I'll let you know if I feel like I'm going to add one, but I don't think I'll do one this week. We will get through this material and the next material in class, and we'll go from there. So, going to slide 58 here. All right, so last time we talked about, or a while ago, so last week we talked about Scrivener, and not Scrivener. Last week we talked about what makes for an accurate translation. That's what we spent time on last week. And then the midweek class, we talked about Scrivener and his work with the KJV Cambridge Paragraph Bible, creating the base text for the King James Version for the work of the Revised Version. And also, let's see if I can get there we go. And also, we have the Scrivener 1881 Greek New Testament. And we went through what was his goal, what was his purpose for releasing this Greek New Testament. If you remember from that class, the midweek class, that he was not attempting to release a new critical edition like Tischendorf, Tregelles, or Lockman. They released new critical editions for their research based on the manuscript evidence that we had. Scrivener is not trying to do that. He's not releasing a new critical edition, the Scrivener Greek New Testament, as what he thinks is most likely the original readings from the apostles. Okay, what he's releasing is what he believed the choices that the KJV translators made in 1611, because there was no underlying Greek text for them. And so we talked about that. We refreshed our memories that the KJV was an eclectic text. And so what Scrivener was doing is he was trying to discern which text the KJV translators were choosing from, and then he's recording that, and that's when he released his 1881 Greek New Testament. So it's not a new critical edition. It's a old critical edition put into one volume, since that volume never existed prior. Okay? All right, and then we started talking about the work of the Revised Version, okay? And the team of revisers being Scrivener, Westcott, and Hort, and their team of over 50 revisers. What we did is we spent a good amount of time talking. We were comparing the new team of the revisers for the KJV, because remember, this is a revision of the KJV. This is the first and only official revision that has ever been done of the KJV. Official revision. There have been many unofficial revisions. And that team consisted primarily of 50 scholars. And we were just comparing how this compared to the KJV when they did theirs. I talked a little bit about Scrivener's credentials, where he was from in the Church of England. He was a bishop he was a priest in the Church of England. And we talked about Westcott, who was a bishop, and we talked about Hort, who was also a priest, and those guys is also their credentials from Cambridge or Oxford or whatever college that they went to as well. And then we said that this team of revisers, this group of 50 revisers, this was important. This was one thing that distinguished the revised edition from the KJV. That being that both the KJV translators and the revised edition revisers, the committee there, they both wanted to make an ecumenical translation. And we talked about with the KJV translators from their preface that they wanted an ecumenical translation, the translation that nearly any denomination would use. This team also wanted that. The difference is when it came to the KJV, all of the translators were members of the Church of England, and they were either bishops or priests of the Church of England. This team of revisers is going to go outside the denomination of the Church of England, because remember, it is the Church of England and Cambridge primarily doing this work. All right, so all three of these men up here, they're going to run the show, and they are members of the Church of England, but they're going to invite other people. So they invite from the UK or from the British Empire. They're going to invite Presbyterians, primarily from the Church of Scotland. They're going to invite Baptists. They're going to invite Wesleyan Methodists, and they're going to invite Congregationalists. That's from the British Empire. And then they're going to send word to America, and they're going to ask an American committee to also join them on this. And that American committee is going to be made up of Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Baptists, Congregationalists, Methodists, and Lutherans, okay? And so that's going to be the denominational representation that's going to go into this revised edition in order to make it ecumenical. But I told you there was also some controversy. There was controversy with one particular man on that committee. His name is Vance Smith, and George Vance Smith is, I said, and I stand by this, I think he's a heretic, all right? So why do I say that? Because he denies Trinitarian theology. And so he's a Unitarian, but he's very credentialed in Greek and Hebrew and so on. And so this man joins the committee, and there's some public outrage about that. And so in the public outrage of that, there's some pushback, and George Vance Smith ends up on the committee. I probably won't cover it again this week, just in my review, but I will cover it next week. I mean, not next week. I did cover it last week. How they voted to make changes. And all of the voting was by either simple majority for a first revision, meaning this is the first time you're looking at it, we'll accept it by simple majority. And then any permanent change that they were going to make was by 2/3 majority. So I'm not going to go through all that process again because I covered it in the midweek class. All that to say was it would have been very difficult for Vance Smith to have his Unitarian bias impact the translation when you've got a 2/3 majority that has to vote on it in order for it to pass. Also, I mentioned that Scrivener himself, he opposed Vance Smith joining the committee. And when it was approved that Vance Smith could be on the committee, he was going to stay on it. They weren't going to remove him. Scrivener, every time they met and they had to discuss the translation, Scrivener made it a point to take the seat next to Vance Smith. He always sat directly next to him. And many have presumed that the reason why Scrivener did this is so that he could oversee what Vance Smith was doing right next to him, and he could make sure that none of his Unitarian biases would find their way into the translation. All three of these men up here, Scrivener, Westcott, Hort, they're all Orthodox Christian men. Westcott and Hort were in favor of Vance Smith because of his credentials. Scrivener was not because of his orthodoxy. Okay, so you could see how that happened. Now, speaking of Westcott and Hort, I didn't say this in my previous video, but I do want to address it now. I want to address it with everybody here, and I want to address it online for people. When it comes to Westcott and Hort, I think these are two of some of the most vilified men in Christian circles, especially the circles, the KJV-only circles I grew up in. These men were absolutely slandered regularly. And as far as I can tell, these were good men so far as good men exist and still preside in their fleshly bodies and fail like all good men fail, okay? We owe these men a great debt. I don't agree with all of their decisions theologically. I'm not a member of the Church of England, so the whole denomination I have problems with, and I have certain issues with them as well. But what I don't want to do is what I've never done in this class, what I've attempted not to do in this class, I should say, is I don't want to even acknowledge the slanders I heard about them, which is why I didn't address it in the midweek class. It's also why I didn't address the slanders about King James himself. There are some people who asked me about particular things that King James is accused of, and as far as I can tell, all of those accusations are unsubstantiated. And because they're unsubstantiated accusations and they're intended to malign a person's character, I don't generally repeat them, even to address them. So Westcott and Hort, like I said, they're not perfect by any means. I do disagree with their theology. I even disagree with Scrivener's theology. He has the same theology as Westcott and Hort, but Scrivener never seems to get the same attacks on him that Westcott and Hort have. And But one thing I can't deny is that these men, all three of them up here, they loved God and they loved the scriptures. And foundationally, there is far more I agree with them on than disagree with them on. Far more, okay? But if you're listening to this today, especially if you have a KJV only background, you've probably heard the slander of Westcott and Hort, and you probably believed it because you were taught to. And like I said, I'm not going to address it here. What I have said about them thus far is true. And for your conscience sake, I'm going to pass on the resources so that if you have heard it and you want them addressed, there's people who have addressed it. All right, so when it comes to slander, my personal view on this is I don't generally address it unless I have to be the one to address it. I'm not going to address it myself. So even in my personal life, I hear someone being slandered. If it's been addressed, I'm like, go talk to the people who have addressed it. I'm not going to engage in this, okay? And I'm not going to do that with Westcott and Hort. And so there have been people who have engaged with this and dealt with it. So here is the Textual Confidence Committee. This is a great resource and a place for you to go to listen to men who have done their due diligence and become experts in this area. The playlist, let's see, this playlist right here is from the Textual Confidence Committee Collective, and I've played clips of this collective multiple times in this class, so this isn't new. But they did 4 videos specifically on the subject of Westcott and Hort, and within these 4 videos, you're going to see my friend Mark Ward, who's this guy here. He's kind of the host of the Textual Confidence Collective. And then you'll also hear from Elijah Hickson in these 4 videos, which we've quoted from many times and used him. You'll hear of Peter Gurry as well. You'll hear from Timothy Berg. You'll hear from Maurice Robinson, who is an advocate of the Byzantine priority position. So he's actually opposed to the text critic methods of Westcott and Hort. He would be someone who disagrees with them even on a scholarship level. He's also going to address some of the slander that's thrown against Westcott and Hort, that it's unsubstantiated. And then the last person I'm going to mention is this guy right here. I'm going to mention him just because he'll be here on Wednesday. This is Peter Montoro. He's also on this Textual Confidence Collective. He'll be here on Wednesday. And he also is on this he addresses the slander on Westcott and Hort as well. And I think I said Timothy Berg, who I think is also one of the foremost experts on the KJV for the Bible today. So yeah, this Wednesday, Peter Montoro will be here. I'm looking forward to meeting him in person. I've talked to him online many times, but I've never met him in person. The 4 videos on the right are going to be videos 8, 9, 10, and 11 of this series on Westcott and Hort, okay? 8, 9, 10, and 11. So if you've been impacted by the slander on Westcott and Hort, you think them to be evil, villainous men who hate God, who are unorthodox, Satan worshipers, etc., 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 you should go listen to these videos. So the 8 videos, like I said, are 8, 9, and 10. 8 is, do Westcott and Hort rule New Testament textual criticism? Kind of the accusation here is that there's been no real scholarship since then, and that we slavishly are bound to the rules and decisions that Westcott and Hort made in 1881. It's just not the case. We've done a lot of scholarship since then. We have found many points of disagreement with them, but we've also found that primarily their work was actually really well done. But we've gotten more information since then, and so there are some areas where we've disagreed. Video number 9, which is where this clip is taken from, is called, "Is It Just to Slander Westcott and Hort?" Spoiler alert, it's not. Okay, it is entirely possible to slander dead people as well, and we're not to commit the sin of slander. And then video number 10 is common lies about Westcott and Hort. They bring out the lies about them and they refute them. And then video number 11 is true and mostly true accusations against Westcott and Hort. And here's where we will agree that we do have disagreements with them on particular issues. And again, this is just to address the slanders of Westcott and Hort. I'm not going to get into it in class because these men were good men. I'm not going to continue to drag their name through the mud. I think we owe them a great debt. Moving on. We also, okay, so here, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm not going to recover this, but this was the 8 rules that the revisers of the Revised Edition had to follow when they did their revision. These 8 rules, we talked about them in the midweek class. They were similarly set down just like King James gave rules for the King James translator, certain things they had to do. There were certain things these revisers had to do, and they're listed in these 8 rules. And this has to do with, how they voted, how they decided to make changes to the KJV and the Scrivener's Greek New Testament, the changes that they were going to make to that, because that was the KJV translator's decisions. And so we have, let's see here, come on. The KJV translators, let's say I told you they took about 7 years to do their translation, and Westcott and Hort and their team, Scrivener, they took 11 years to complete their revised edition, okay? And so we have the Westcott and Hort Greek New Testament and the Revised English edition. And so this, again, is the only official update to the KJV to date. In order for it to be, what do I mean by an official update? In order for someone to do an official update of any translation, you have to have the copyright holder, the one who holds the copyright, make the revision or authorize the revision, okay? So the copyright holders, when it comes to the King James, is the Crown of England and Cambridge. And then Oxford, we'll talk about, has a special printing right. But those two, Cambridge and the Crown of England, the Church of England, the Crown of England, they have the rights to the KJV. In America, we don't recognize it. I'll get into this further. We don't recognize the copyright from the Crown because they hold what's called a perpetual copyright, and meaning they don't have to renew it, they don't have to do anything, and so we'll talk about that further. All right, so anyway, this is I put the wrong picture up here. Sorry, I thought I changed them all. Yesterday I realized I put the wrong picture. It's the wrong title page to the wrong Bible, but we'll see the right one in a few moments. I thought I caught them all. I missed this one. But anyway, it's because it says Revised English Bible at the top. It's wrong. That's an older version. The Revised Edition, or the English Revised Version, or the Revised English Version we'll talk about, is released in 1881. And we talked about this last week. The Chicago Tribune printed the entire New Testament of the Revised Edition in 16 pages of their newspaper. Okay? I thought that was just absolutely amazing when this came out. Then I talked about last week, this midweek service, I also talked about booksellers in New York on Wall Street started selling the New Testament at 4 a.m. and by 3 p.m. had sold 250,000 copies on Wall Street in New York. Amazing stuff. All right. And then I talked about Broadus. We're not going to talk about him now. Hold on. Let's see. I want to go to 74. All right, and then here's where we are. And so this is the new stuff. So the English Revised Version has gone by many names, which is why it can be confusing when you're doing this study, because it starts getting confusing as to which translation is being talked about. So these are generally, when I was doing my research, generally how I saw the English Revised Version being mentioned as the Revised Version, just the RV, the English Revised Version, or the Revised English Version, okay? And the reason being is because the titles weren't so neat as they are today. When someone releases a new translation today, they give it usually a 3-word title, they give it a 3-letter acronym, and it's very clear. That didn't really exist yet. The KJV had it, but it wasn't like standard. People weren't doing that. The official name was the Holy Bible, containing the Old and New Testaments, translated out of the original tongues, being the version set forth in AD 1611, compared with the most ancient authorities and revised. That's the title that was released. And then, remember, we have a new revision coming out. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The Revised Version is now going to get revised, okay? And it's going to be revised for the American Committee. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And that is their title, the Holy Bible containing the Old and New Testaments, translated out of the original tongues, being the version set forth in 1611, compared with the most ancient authorities and revised newly by the American Revision Committee, AD 1901 Standard Edition, which ultimately will get shortened to the American Standard Version of 1901. That's what it's called today. All right. So how did this edition come to be? So remember that revised English version? They had an American committee. I told you needed to remember that in the last video because that American committee was really important. While in England, working on the revised edition on a KJV, which is a British Bible, to the revised edition, which will be a British Bible, the American committee had some disagreements about how to handle certain things. And these two committees worked together on the update, but there were decisions that the American committee wanted in the update that the British company did not want. And for example, the American committee wanted to use the divine name Jehovah in their translation, okay? And the British company wanted to retain the use of the all caps Lord, all right? So there was a disagreement there. And certain British expressions and words, the Americans didn't want, because we don't use them in America. For example, the revised edition maintained the KJV reading in Genesis 36:19 that says, "These are the sons of Esau, and these are their dukes." Okay, and so in America, we're like, well, we don't have dukes. We don't even relate to dukes. So they wanted it changed to chiefs. And in America, we have things like the chief of staff. We have police chiefs. We had Native Americans here, and we called their leaders of their particular tribes chiefs. All right, so chiefs was our nomenclature. We didn't have dukes. There was nothing about dukes in America. We rejected the entire duke system. So they wanted that changed. They wanted other vernacular change, such as the word minish in Britain was commonly understood, but in America we would say diminish, and so they wanted that changed. There are also places in the American committee where they wanted what was in the margin to be what was in the text, and they wanted what was in the text to be moved to the margin, so they wanted to flip some areas. There are also a few places where the Americans opted for a particular minor textual variant over what the British company wanted. So there was disagreement on which textual variant to go with. The American company wanted one particular variant. The British company wanted another. So because of these differences, a compromise was made. The revised edition of 1881, that every decision that the American company made that didn't make it into the revised edition of 1881, all of their decisions would be put in the appendix at the back of the Bible. So they would have a footnote to direct you to the appendix of the back of the Bible, and you could see all of the things that the American committee wanted that were rejected by the British committee. Remember, it was 2/3 majority, and the British company had that majority over the American company. So they didn't always get what they wanted. So today, you can buy today, Cambridge sells what is called the KJV Revised Edition Interlinear Bible with the American Standard Version appendix. Okay, with the Americans, this is what's here. And so if you come up and you look at this after, you can open this up and you can see every single change that was made to the KJV in the Revised Edition. Then you can go to the back of the Old Testament and you can see all of the changes that the American committee wanted that were rejected. And you can go back to the end of the New Testament and see all the changes that the American committee wanted that weren't in the Revised Edition. So it's back of the Old Testament, back of the New Testament for all of their decisions. Obviously, I have this Bible here, so you can come and take a look at it if you want. It's a great study resource. It's also a wide margin, so you can mark it up if you want as well. I use it less frequently now, but I used to use it all the time. And then, and the second compromise that would be made, okay, this is the second one. So the first compromise was every decision we asked for that you rejected, please put in an appendix. They said, golden, we'll do that. The second compromise was the American company wanted to release an edition of their own that reflected their decisions. And the British company agreed to it under one condition. They had to wait 20 years to do it. So in 1881, the Revised Edition was released. 20 years later, the American Standard Version was released. Now, during that 20-year gap, right? Because you have all of those American decisions in the back, right? What are people doing? They're making their own versions, American revisions. And so there's a bunch of bootleg copies out there of the American version, right? So people were making their own. And so what does that do? That causes, let's see if I can highlight it here. See this here? The Standard Edition. All right, that Standard Edition, that was their way of saying, this is the one we're officially putting out. All of those other ones are not the standard. They're the bootleg versions. And that becomes why all of our translations today, generally, not all of them, but most of them have the word standard in it. This becomes the nomenclature. So we have the English Standard Version, the Christian Standard Bible, the Legacy Standard Bible, the New American Standard Bible. All of those standards start here just to say this one's the official one. This is the one we're releasing officially. It's not some bootleg version of it. Okay, and that's how that came to be, and it's stuck. And so now I hear people all the time, why do we have so many standards? Well, we have standards because there are people making their own, and we're saying this is the official one. Okay, so there's that. Cambridge and the Crown. So we get Cambridge and the Crown would retain the rights to the KJV and the Revised Version to this day. Oxford holds a special privilege of printing in these editions as well. And remember, the Oxford text is not identical to the Cambridge text. We talked about that. The differences between the two, so just keep that in mind. If you buy an Oxford Bible, you're going to have about a dozen or so differences than the Cambridge Bible. All right. While the KJV and the English Revised Version are both in public domain in America, it's not true that they're copyright free, okay? In the UK, and anybody that recognizes the Crown's authority in any other place, they are not public domain. You have to get permission to use them, okay? It's just, like I said, America is like, we're not going to listen to perpetual copyrights from the Crown, where we're not under your authority. So we'll go into public domain even when the Crown won't let us, okay, or doesn't want us to, okay? The American Standard Version, however, the American Standard Version would be a revision of the Revised English Version, okay, or the English Revised Version. It's going to be an update of that. So it's not an official update to the KJV. It's an official update to the Revised Version. Now, the copyright for that was held by Thomas Nelson, or Nelson and Sons, as it was called back then. Okay, they held the copyright to that. And interestingly enough, the RV did not retain the momentum it started with. Had this huge momentum, like all of the newspapers printing it and lots of Bibles being sold. It declined in momentum compared to the American Standard Version. The American Standard Version definitely got more popularity, and I will say this up front, neither of these ever reached the popularity of the KJV. The KJV was still number one in sales during this time. And then Thomas Nelson will eventually sell their rights to the American Standard Version to the International Council of Religious Education. And they held that copyright until it was released in public domain in 1957. So now the American Standard Version is in public domain, okay? What happened after the American Standard Version came out? Because this is going to be important. At the time, the American Standard Version represented the latest in scholarship with regard to biblical languages until a few really important discoveries happened, such as the Chester Beatty Papyri, which was a bunch of early manuscripts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries that were super helpful in textual criticism. We already had things like Sinaiticus and so on and so forth, but now we were getting other manuscripts, papyrus and fragments that were confirming the readings that we were seeing in Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and things of that nature. And so they were very helpful in maybe some difficulties. Maybe there were places where Sinaiticus and Vaticanus disagreed that these manuscripts would weigh in on and help. Okay, and so this was really important. The other one And the Chester Beatty Papyri discovered in 1927. Some have said that this was the greatest discovery to happen in biblical manuscripts since Tischendorf, who discovered the Sinaiticus. Okay, so this was really important. This one is really interesting to me. There was another big discovery in linguistics that was super helpful for us, and this discovery was in a place called Oxyrhynchus in Egypt. This was a huge discovery. Essentially, it was a garbage dump, okay? And in this garbage dump, there were about 500,000 manuscripts going back to the first century. So now we're getting contemporary with the biblical authors. And when I say that, you might think we're talking about biblical manuscripts, but we're not. There were some biblical manuscripts here. I think there's one particular that I know of that came from this discovery, which was from the Gospel of Matthew. It was a small fragment from the Gospel of Matthew. There might have been some others, but that's not really what's important about this. And that didn't go all the way back to the first century. What's really important about this is we found thousands and thousands and thousands of examples of all sorts of writing. We found receipts for goods. We found handwritten letters, personal letters from one person to another. We found contracts. We found poetry. And what does this allow us to do? We found pretty much every kind of writing going way back. This allowed scholars to do for the first time is to read words and phrases in the biblical era context. For a long time, because the Bible was unique among literature for early Greek, the language of the Bible was often called Holy Ghost Greek. All right, it was called Holy Ghost Greek because we had nothing to compare it to. It was unique. It stood alone. It wasn't like Plato. It wasn't like other classical authors that we had. It was different. And so we didn't know much about the Greek of the Bible. We just knew it was different. And so some said it was elevated. It was Holy Ghost Greek. It was how the Holy Ghost spoke. Well, this discovery, I actually remember hearing about Holy Ghost Greek when I was a kid, and I didn't understand it at the time, but I do now. But what this discovery did is it allowed us to finally classify the Bible as Common Greek, Koine Greek. We can compare it to all of the writings that we had, the thousands and thousands and thousands of over 500,000 manuscripts, and say, oh, this is how people talked and wrote. We could also do things like we talked about last week. We could hear register for the first time, right? Contract language versus personal letter. We could make determinations like, did Paul use profanity? This is stuff we can do now that we found all of this stuff. So this was huge linguistically. And so because of this, though, there was a problem. There were works like Thayer's Greek English Lexicon, which I have right here, Thayer's Greek Lexicon. If you use Blue Letter Bible, this is the free lexicon on Thayer's. Free lexicon on Blue Letter Bible is the Thayer's one. The problem is this is released in 1885, I believe is the release date of this. And this discovery, so it was only like a few decades old, made this work basically obsolete. Because this could only, lexicons like dictionaries, they will use example sentences, right? And now our example sentence source is broadened massively. We understand more about the semantic range of words and things of that nature. It didn't overturn everything we knew about Greek. Some places it confirmed it. But in places where it didn't confirm it and it contradicted us, it would turn this obsolete. This was something I used all the time until I learned about this. So I have it still. I used to use it a lot. I don't use it so much anymore. I use more contemporary stuff because we have more information now. So Thayer's is obsolete. If you use Thayer's, just know that you're not getting the most up-to-date information based on those manuscript discoveries. So the insight of the new papyri and linguistics meant biblical scholars felt they could update our translations as well. Right? So now we have the ASV 1901 with all of this new stuff that we can incorporate into the translation. And so it's no longer up to date. And so the American Standard Version of 1901 was going to get an update to the which would be updated to the Revised Standard Version of 1952. Now you can see why there's going to be confusion. We have the Revised Version of 1881 and the Revised Standard Version of 1952. This is why I wrote some of this stuff down, because when you're researching this, it can get confusing really quickly. So the International Council of Religious Education bought the rights to the American Standard Version in order that they could do a revision to the Revised Standard Version. And so the RSV would attempt to apply pretty much everything that they learned to the ASV, and they would give us the 1952 Revised Standard Version. They would have a team of 32 scholars on the team attempting to do this update. And as these things go, there's a desire to be an ecumenical translation. You're going to see why ecumenical starts to get a bad name soon, okay? I think ecumenical is a good thing when done properly, but what happens is their desire to do an ecumenical translation is they include people on the team that becomes controversial. They include Jewish scholars as well, non-Christian scholars, okay? And because of that, there's an outrage. And the huge outrage that occurs is primarily over a single verse. One verse. And we talked about this already, but it's the ASV in Isaiah 7:14 says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel," where the Revised Standard Version updated the word virgin to young woman. And this created a firestorm, okay? Unfortunately. And the reason being is I've already covered this in class. I covered this in our 16th lesson. So I'm not going to rehash this. Let me see if I can get my cursor over there. I'm not going to rehash this, but our 16th lesson, at about 38 minutes in, I cover this, this decision to change it to young woman, and why there's validity to this decision, and why there's also validity to the use of the word virgin, because we don't have an exact word in English that covers the semantic range of the Hebrew word identically. It has essentially two meanings, young woman and virgin, okay? And so anyway, we have translations for that, but that created a firestorm. That made people very upset, and which is always the case. It was the case when the Protestants updated the Latin Vulgate. It was the case when the KJV was updated to the Revised Version. There's always controversy when we update the traditional language. I think this is not a horrible thing, unless it's blown out of proportion. I think this forces scholars not to react quickly, but to react slowly and carefully. And it forces them to show their work and bring people along. I think that's a good thing. But as is the case, most lay people aren't informed, and so they just react instead of doing the work. And so there's that. Now, the controversy between the scholars, you can imagine now, you've got Jewish scholars on the team, already a problem. And then you change the sign of the Messiah to young woman. You've created a hotbed of controversy. I get it. And so now that's going to cause people to think we need more options for updated translations. And so this is what I call the lineage of revisions. All right, on the lineage of revisions, we have all the way to the left, we have the Bishop's Bible, okay, which is a conglomerate of a bunch of revisions like the Great Bible before it. How far back do I go? I can go all the way back to Tyndale. All right, but we have the Bishop's Bible, which was directly revised into the KJV. The KJV was directly revised into the Revised Version, which was directly revised into the ASV, which was directly revised into the RSV. Well, that needed, the scholarship was that they wanted to provide more options. So the American Standard Version now, at this point in our history, in our timeline, is in public domain, okay? Because the ICRE let the copyright lapse, because they didn't need to maintain it, because they released the Revised Standard Version, that's the latest, they let the copyright lapse into the ASV. And so now the ASV is in public domain, and we get our next translation option from the Lockman Foundation, and Mrs. Frances Seward, and Lockman publishes her work on the Amplified Bible. That is the next one. How many here have used the Amplified Bible? Okay, one. Okay, good. So this is not going to be you might see things for the first time you haven't seen before. And anyone who's been reading the evangelical book that we just started on Wednesday nights, you all just used the Amplified version because he quoted from it recently. So we'll talk about the Amplified version going forward. We got a few more minutes. So let's give you a little quick history of the Amplified version, because we're going to cover this in more detail next week. This is what Lockman has written on their website about the Amplified version and where it came from, okay? It says, as the official research secretary of the project, Mrs. Frances Seward laid the foundation for the Amplified Bible. Mrs. Seward dedicated her life to the intensive study of the scriptures as well as to the cultural and archaeological background of biblical times. The editorial board, founded by the Lockman Foundation, carefully reviewed her monumental work on the New Testament. The edited and proofread translation was then submitted to a committee of qualified Greek consultants. 27 translations and versions of the New Testament were meticulously examined and continually compared, while the Greek text of Westcott and Hort, the standard of the time, was pursued with the utmost care. So they did 27 revisions before they released it. Or maybe I should say it this way, 27 drafts. Okay, 27 drafts before they finally published it. All right, the result was the Amplified New Testament in 1958. This was followed by a 2-volume Amplified Old Testament in 1962 and 1964, which was the work of an editorial committee of a staff of qualified Hebrew consultants and, once again, Mrs. Seward's contributions as the research secretary. All of this culminated with the 1-volume Amplified Bible in 1965. Remembered by the Lockman Foundation for her long life of tireless devotion to God, her expertise in the Greek language, and her impressive knowledge concerning scriptures, Mrs. Frances Seward went home to be with the Lord March 29, 1967. As the official research secretary of the Amplified Bible Project, Mrs. Seward displayed her tremendous passion for the Lord. This passion shone brightly throughout her monumental task of laying the translation foundation for the Amplified Bible. With the Amplified Bible, Mrs. Seward left us a legacy of her love for God, and we are forever indebted to her for her contributions, insight, and vision, which can be seen today throughout the pages of the Amplified Bible's unlocked word meanings and timeless truths. Elsewhere on the Lockman website, they also have this to say, a little bit shorter. The story of the Amplified Bible is a remarkable story of faith, hope, and love. It's a story of a woman, a foundation, and a publisher. Commitment, energy, enthusiasm, and giftedness. These are the words that paint the picture of the making of a translation. Frances Seward was a woman with intense dedication to the Bible, to the study of the Bible. It was Mrs. Seward who laid the foundation for the Amplified Bible. She devoted her life to the Bible, the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek languages, and she was devoted to the cultural and archaeological background of biblical times, which would result in this unique translation. Every vision needs visionaries willing to follow the cause. The story of this dream is no different. Mrs. Seward's vision was seen by the Lockman Foundation, who took on the monumental translation project. Zondervan Publishing House then joined the effort. The dream became a reality with the publication of the Amplified New Testament in 1958, the 2-volume Old Testament in 1962 and 64, and the 1-volume Amplified Bible in 1965. So let's talk about the Amplified Bible as we close out here. This is what we're going to pick up with next week. All right. Since its release in 1965 as a single volume complete Bible, the Amplified Bible has gone through 2 major revisions, one in 1987 and one in 2015 being the most recent one. Next week, we're going to get into the preface of the Amplified Bible. And I'm just going to give you a spoiler right now. I'm going to give you my contentions with the Amplified Bible. I have issues with it, and you're going to see that there's a little yellow flag up there. You're only going to see flags going forward on translations that are still being published today. They've not gone into public domain. They're still being maintained and revised. The Amplified Bible is still a Bible that's being published today, maintained and revised. I have 3 color flags: red, yellow, green. Yellow means I think you need to take cautions with this translation. Green means it's good to go. Generally, trust it. And red means we've got problems. This is a heretical Bible, okay? We're going to deal with the red ones probably at the end of the class, but we're going to deal with why I have contentions with the Amplified Bible, and I'm going to demonstrate them from their own preface. So it's a yellow flag translation. You're not going to fall into heresy by using this Bible, okay? What you're going to fall into is sometimes you'll be misled, and I'll explain why next week, all right? You all are dismissed. Thank you.